Hi, welcome to the Intentional Entrepreneur Podcast. So great to have you on, Renae.
I am so grateful to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So, welcome. Today we are going to be talking all about productivity around your cycle. I know that Renae, you are the expert when it comes to productivity around your cycle, so I'm super excited to dive in. So, how about we start if you could let us know a little bit about who you are and how you help them.
Yeah. So I am a mom. I am also a trained neonatal therapist. And I had started my journey into entrepreneurship about 6 years ago when my last baby was born, and I was pregnant with her. My husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And so we went through this like whirlwind of a year trying to navigate seizures and hospital visits and my husband not being able to drive and like me going back and forth to work and him back and forth to work and like kids back and forth to school and like all of the things. And I like brought me to my breaking moment. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. What am I going to do? Navigated into entrepreneurship, which then, as many entrepreneurs know, is more than a full-time job. You're
Absolutely.
all the time. And I was like, why did I do this? It's like, I want this dream. I want this goal, but it's just so hard. And I'm working so hard. And at the time I had a coach and mentor and I reached out to her. I'm like, I'm not seeing the success I want. Things aren't working. And she's like, you just have to do more. And I was like, I can't do more. Like,
Oh,
physically, I cannot do more. I'm like bleeding at the knuckles. I'm pumping and eating my lunch and working at the exact same time on my lunch breaks at the hospital. And I'm like, I can't. And so that was shortly around the time that I discovered that women are just different and we have a different
mhm.
rhythm to our productivity. And so those moments of feeling like on top of the world and I'm going to crush my goals and feeling really great. And then 2 weeks later, feeling like the world's biggest failure and like I suck as a mom and I want to burn my business down and all those, like those were all normal. And it was all part of the rhythm of how women produce work. And like it literally changed the game for me in so many different
Mhm.
ways. And I started sharing it with my clients at the time and they were like, this is mind blowing. This is
Yeah,
crazy. How are we 30, 40, 50 years old? And we've never heard about this. And I noticed like immediate shifts in my clients as soon as they started like learning and using it. And I was like, okay, this is where I need to start talking. And this is how I need to start sharing. And so that's what I do. Now I help women entrepreneurs, like really ambitious women who they want to do all the things, right? Like they want to be coaching soccer and they want to be building massive businesses and they want to be, doing like all taking care of themselves. Like they want to do all of those things. They just don't want to burn out in the process. Like we use your menstrual cycle in order to be able to do that. So that is what I do.
absolutely. Well, I have so many questions for you, but I loved what you said, and I don't know if you would relate to this, but I have heard, and I think about this, is that the way that our society runs is really based on male hormones, that 24-hour cycle, whereas our cycle is really, or the way that we can be productive and how we work is really based on our own cycles and maybe, that 28 or 34-day cycle rather than trying to fit it into 24 hours should always look the same.
Yeah, 100%. So men have testosterone and it replenishes and operates on a 24-hour rhythm. And so they tend to do really well. Like they have more of a high in the morning, it waxes and wanes throughout the day, and they go to bed, they get a replenishment of testosterone every single day. So that 24-hour schedule and rhythm
Mhm.
definitely does support how men operate. Women have estrogen in the first half of their month and progesterone in the second half of the month. Estrogen is this like fire up, let's get going, like take on the world, big momentum, all of this, like, yeah, like big, great, wonderful energy, like what we'd call quote unquote productive. And then
Mhm.
progesterone kicks in, and progesterone's like, I feel like I failed. I want to pull back. I don't want to do this. I don't want to talk to anybody this week. Like, oh my gosh, do I really have to do a podcast interview today? Like, that's progesterone. And so we function differently. And so the idea of like consistency, right? Like we hear it all the time. You just need to be consistent. You need to show up consistently. And while we do need to consistently be moving our businesses forward and continually putting things into our business, how we do that and what that looks like needs to shift and change throughout the month based on where we're at. And what I find is that when women lean into this more 28-day rhythm or monthly rhythm or 35 or whatever your cycle is,
Mm-hmm.
that you tend to get more done in less time because you're leaning into where your body's naturally at. And at the same time, you're able to balance and have this like work-life flow where you pull back and have more rest time without feeling guilty, right? That's the biggest thing is like so many women feel guilty about taking self-care or taking time off or resting or wanting to not show up on social media this week or whatever it is. And they feel guilty about it because they've been told for so long, you just need to be consistent. When in reality, that's not how we were designed. And so when we start to leverage that and what I teach my clients, like about how to know where those different times are going to be and what the best times to be performing things are, what they do is that they then arrange their schedule, not in a 24-hour schedule, but maybe you're doing all of your social media in 1 week of the month. And that
Mm-hmm.
1 week is when you're primed and you feel great and you record a reel in like 10 seconds versus having to re-record that reel 7, 8, 9 times, if not more, taking you hours to create that reel because you're just like, I didn't say it right. I didn't do it well. I feel like crap. I don't look very good. Versus if we do that reel when you're in the most magnetic, most radiant place and you communicate the most effectively, it's like, bam, done, over, and like move on. And you're going to be so much more powerful at like attracting clients when you're in that confident state versus when you force yourself to show up on social media because you're trying to be consistent, but you're in a state when your body's like, don't make me do this. Right. So
Absolutely. And the
yeah.
thing that I love about that too, when I started learning about productivity around your cycle, is that we have like, I used to think of like, I think of it as like the fall season, but the time before you get your period, where I used to think of it as like, oh, this time of my cycle that I dreaded, that I couldn't do
Mm-hmm.
anything. Um, like it was just a time that I just avoided basically, and I didn't want to have. But now that I've learned about it, and I don't know if this is something that you work with your clients, is there's kind of like a gift or a special thing that
Mm-hmm.
we can do with every part of our cycle. And there is actually a superpower, as kind of how I
Yeah.
see it, in each phase that we can really harness. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that one, because I know from a lot of the clients that I talk to is like one challenge that we really feel in the fall is that idea of self-doubt and what if I look bad? What if I like even today I was like, oh, do my teeth look funny in this video? Like, like just silly things like that I wouldn't think at another phase. So I'd love to know from you, how do you kind of harness that time in a way that's positive and without letting the self-doubt kind of take over?
Yeah. Well, and I love that you brought that up because I really think as women, we need to redefine what productivity looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So that estrogen dominant phase, I call it your accelerate phase. It's your follicular phase. It's when your estrogen's like climbing. People kind of think that is productivity. It's like the masculine type of productivity, like get shit done. Oh, I hope I'm okay to
That's
say that.
okay.
Like get stuff done, right? Like that's that energy. And so oftentimes people think, well, I can't just be productive 1 week of the month. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really, like you said, each one of the phases has an intention. It has a power. It has some element of productivity, but it's redefining what productivity really looks like. So yeah, that luteal phase, I call it the reflect phase. It does have a lot of emotion. It has a lot of self-doubt. It has a lot of limiting beliefs. And it also is your best time to write content. It's your best time to write emails or sales pages or whatever it might be, because you have all of that strong emotion. You're going to be able to resonate and connect with your
Mm.
person more than any other time of the month, right? Like we hear, write about their pain points, write about their strengths, like write about what their desires, all that stuff. Like in those moments is when you write about it in a way that really like pierces their heart and they feel it so much more than in another phase. And so it does have productivity sorts of elements. It just doesn't look like the banging and crushing and nailing all the stuff down. It's different. And each one of the phases is the same. So Honestly, when I started doing this, that reflect phase became my favorite phase because I got so much of this writing and this juicy content stuff done that I felt like I was forcing myself to do in other phases. And in
Mm.
that, it was like, I could just get it done. When I write and I send the email out, people are like, how did you get into my head? How did you know that? And it's because I literally was feeling it. I could like feel into those moments, right? And so it becomes really powerful that way. The same as like your menstrual cycle, people oftentimes see it as a really negative thing. It's this hush hush, we don't talk about it, like hide
Mhm.
inside the box sort of space, but it's also has two really big benefits. One of them is it's your sense, I call it the recharge phase because that's what it's for. It's helping you recharge for that acceleration.
Mhm.
Just the same as like I live in Southern California, we have Teslas everywhere.
As do
Teslas,
we here.
they go incredibly fast, right? Like I think it's like 0 to 60 in 3 seconds.
Mhm.
But if the thing's not charged, it's not going to go anywhere, right? Like it has to charge. And so when we as humans look at like a Tesla has to have the battery charged in order to go really, really fast. Why do we think as humans, we can just keep going and going and going without ever recharging? And how beautiful is it that your body has this recharge phase right before your peak acceleration, right before your peak productivity phase? Like you have this element of going into it fully recharged and fully ready to go. And that is what enables you to get more done and operate at your peak. So that's one benefit of that recharge phase. The other benefit is a lot of people see it as the place of the month where you get the most insight into your subconscious beliefs and the most ability to rewrite those subconscious beliefs. And if you know anything about creating change and whatnot, it's all about the identity and it's all
Mhm.
about our beliefs and how our beliefs operate everything. So in that phase, you have the power to tap into your highest intuition, be able to know what's right for you, what's wrong for you, and to know what like you unlock your biggest, greatest ideas and be able to know what's true and right for you and not for what everybody else is telling you, but what's right for you. The deal with that is like we have to create the space to recharge and cut the noise so that we can listen to that. And so even that phase has its own major superpower. We've already talked a lot about the accelerate phase. That connect phase is right around the time of ovulation. Its
Mhm.
power is that you are the most magnetic and the most radiant
Mhm.
and the most glowing. Like your body's literally trying to attract a mate physiologically and make a baby, even if you're not trying to make a baby, like your body is telling you that. And so you like come across so much more confident and you communicate so much more effectively and you just radiate to people more than any other time of the month. And so when we start to see each of those different phases of like, okay, I don't have to do all of these things in the same day, right? Like I don't have to do my admin work and my reels and my emails and like
Mhm.
everything in the same day, but that I can still get them all done when I plan it according to this monthly rhythm instead, you become so much more powerful.
So much more powerful. And I think too, like one of the things that I found in my business for a long time is I was following the structure that I learned from somebody else. And yes, I got the systems that I needed, but being able to actually plan in a way that feels intuitively right for you and really leaning into
Mhm.
that, I think is that beautiful way to mix that what's going to work for like what's going to work for other people and how you can make it work for you and following that intuition.
Yeah.
um and the other thing that I love about, I mean, I call it the fall phase. I think you had a
Yeah.
beautiful way to say it. Do you call it the recharge phase? What did you call it?
Reflect.
Reflection
Mhm.
is the thing that I found about it too, is it's a beautiful time to really tie up loose ends. So like you
Mhm.
said with the writing, like that's when
Yeah.
I'm really like when I feel compelled to finish up my writing, finish up the little tasks that the nagging tasks that I haven't
Yep.
wanted to do, I can really pull that in then. And even like on most of the people listening here are moms like you and me. Like I cleared out all of my kids' toy
Yes.
clutter the other day. And that like I never normally want to do that, right? Because you
Yeah.
have all of a sudden that kind of like superpower that's charged up. So
Yes. It's the dot
yeah,
your T's, cross your I's, like
totally.
organizational, like you think even like during pregnancy, progesterone is one of more of the dominant hormones during pregnancy. And so
Mm-hmm.
you think of like that final nesting, like you're like, I just got to wash everything and I got to unpack everything and I got to
Totally.
get it all organized and ready. that is kind of some of the element of that energy. And it does feel that way, but it's not like I want to go out and do and with all these other
No.
people. It's like, I want to be in my own, like plug in my headphones, get things messy, get it organized, get it put back together, tie it all together. So, and ultimately, if you think about it, it's like, it's preparing you to be able to take your break, right? You're getting
Yes.
all your stuff together so that you can then take a break to recharge and then go into that next phase again. And so it's like, it's all very strategic. It's not coincidental.
No.
And I think we just we haven't thought about it, but when we start to pay attention, we're like, oh my gosh, these patterns have been there.
Yeah, and I think the pattern too is I used to feel bad about myself. Like I would have these 2 weeks of like real like traditional productivity. And I just felt like that should be my baseline. That should be
Yes.
normal. And then when I didn't have that later, I would feel bad about myself or I was doing something wrong. But now I see it as like I have this supercharged phase and this different phase that's like, that's not my normal. That's like I have this extra power. And when I've kind of reframed that, I found that really to be super
Mm-hmm.
I guess just really much more accepting of my natural
Yeah.
rhythms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of my clients will say like they just feel like they have so much more permission, like permission
Yeah.
to take a break or permission to do it their own way, or, permission to take the rest and take the care and whatever they need without feeling guilty about it because they know it's just what their body's rhythm is. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One question that I had for you that I know that some of the entrepreneurs, the moms who are listening are going to say, yeah, that's great for you, but like I'm approaching menopause or
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the middle of menopause. How does that work if we're, in our late 40s or early 50s or something like that and we don't feel like our cycle is the way that it used to be? How does that affect things?
Yeah. Well, I want to highlight there too, not just for menopause, but like if you're pregnant or on birth
Mhm.
control or irregular cycles, like all of the things, that might be a question you might be asking. And so particularly like if it's an irregular cycle, we want to kind of take a look at like, why is it irregular, right? Because we have patterns of behavior that are impacting the way our body shows up and our body's impacting us. It's like the symbiotic relationship that kind of go hand in hand. So for many of us, we've never been taught to live into a 28-day rhythm. So our
Mhm.
body is really smart and it's trying to adapt to whatever rhythm we give it. So if, for instance, like if you were to try to wake up earlier in the morning and you're used to waking up at 7 o'clock, but now all of a sudden you set your alarm for 5, the first few weeks is going to be really, really challenging. And then eventually your body's going to be like, okay, we wake up at 5 and it's going to start naturally waking up at 5. Your
Right.
body's kind of doing the same thing when it comes to your menstrual cycle. So you're telling it we operate in this 24-hour rhythm and it's trying its best to get into that 24-hour rhythm, which then throws off your menstrual rhythm because your menstrual rhythm is not designed to be in that way. And so
Mhm.
taking a look at like what the habits and the rhythms that we have in our life, and are they supporting a regular rhythm? And for a majority of us, probably not. There's a
Yeah.
lot of factors that are increasing and causing a lot of cycle irregularities. Now, that's one part of it. If you have no cycle because of a hysterectomy, birth control, menopause, pregnancy, like anything of that nature, what I find is that all of my clients in that category still feel the rhythms of a cyclical nature. It just looks a little different and it feels a little different. So it may not be your hormones that's directly impacting that cycle and how you operate. You could use just a calendar. You could use a moon. You could use the moon, or you could use something of that nature. But we tend as women to just operate best in a cycle regardless.
Mhm.
Even if you just look at the world in general, like like you even referenced it as fall, like we have
Mhm.
spring, summer, winter, fall, like the earth and mother nature itself doesn't even operate in this like on sort of state all the time. It has seasons of, blooming and flowering and harvesting and then dormancy. And so when we start to look at it, like this is a part of our natural rhythm to do this, and we lean into that just on whatever rhythm that looks like for us, we tend to feel much more balance and much more flow and much more, ease than when we're trying to just stay in that on off switch all the time.
Absolutely. And I think that the beautiful thing about seeing it like a season, that's how I kind of look at it like this, the fall season, the winter season, is that it's not just one or the other, like you said, that there's really like a kind of like an ebb and a flow to it. Like it's not
Mhm.
just one or the other. There's kind of like there are varieties within it. And I think that
Mhm.
is it just gives you so much more understanding and I think self-compassion for yourself when you actually can
Mhm.
see it like that.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. One last question that I had for you
Yeah.
before we finish up is if someone is, just getting into this and is thinking like, oh, that sounds really interesting. I've never tried, like that sounds overwhelming, maybe syncing up my plans with my cycle. How would you recommend someone get started if they were just looking to get started with syncing up their cycle to their productivity?
Yeah, I think the number one thing would be just start to pay attention to your cycle. I was
Hmm.
actually amazed at how many women don't track their cycle at all.
Yeah.
So I would say that is number one, would be just to start tracking your cycle, like your menstrual cycle, but also not just your menstrual cycle, but like the rest of the month, right? Like we've been kind of thought to believe that like your menstrual cycle is just this one time monthly occurrence, but your cycle is this like thing that's happening all month long, and your bleeding is just an encore. Like it's just the one production of it. And so kind of starting to pay attention. I do have a cycle tracker over on my website that you can snag that will help you kind of see your whole month in a sheet of paper, and then you can compare it month to month to month. And whether you use that one or paper tracker, or if you use a digital tracker or use some sort of tracker, that would be like number one, is just to start listening and just to start noticing what's actually happening in your body, and not feel like you have to force it or change anything, or that you have to create this massive overhaul, but it's just to start tuning in and listening to your body, because guaranteed, like that's not something worth being taught, right? Like society's
Mhm.
telling you to eat a certain way, to sleep a certain way, to exercise a certain way. Like there's so many things and experts out there telling you how to eat, what to eat, when to eat, how to sleep, all those things, that very rarely are they telling you like, hey, are you listening to your body? Like, are you actually listening to what you need, not what maybe
Mhm.
5 other different people need, but doesn't work for your body? So that would be the number one place I would start, is just start tuning in. And I have all of my clients, like every single day, the number one question I want them asking is like, what does my body need today? And so that would be a great question to start with too.
Yeah. And like, I think there's such a wisdom when you start tracking your cycle and not just, oh, I got my period today, but when you actually start to notice how you're feeling at different
Mhm.
times of your cycle and how much energy you have, because then you'll start to see like, oh, I have more energy at this time. And that's just normal. I'm going to get it back again. And you
Yeah.
can really start to get insights as to how your body works rather than feeling like, I think when we're not tracking it, we can feel a little bit out like, blind, right? But when
Yeah,
you start to see the data like that, it can really give you some great insights as to how you can work better.
for sure. For sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. Before we close out, I'd love to know if there's anything else that you would share with share with the listeners, anything that you feel like we haven't touched on.
I feel like we kind of covered most of it, but I think it really is in this essence of just like starting to learn to listen and trust your body, and know that just because somebody else is telling you that you have to post on social media consistently, or that you should wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, or that you should eat a certain way, doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's right for you.
Mhm.
And if you can hone in and start trusting your intuition, trusting your
Yes.
body, it will not steer you wrong.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. So good. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Let me know
Yeah.
where, if the listeners want to find out more about you, how can we connect with you online?
Yeah, I would say my podcast is The Cycle Advantage. So you can find us over there. The other places I love hanging out most are on Instagram at Renae Fieck, and on TikTok, just Renae Fieck there too. So those would be the two greatest places. If you want to grab that cycle tracker, you can go to renaefieck.com. And I think that's it. Yeah, those are my
Awesome. Well,
places.
we'll link those up in the show notes for anyone who wants to check you out. And thank you so much for coming on. It was great chatting with you today.
Thank you so much for having me.